So let's start with something controversial. We are going into autumn or the fall, depending on what you call it from where you're from, and it is pumpkin season. So we're going to start to see pumpkins everywhere. They're going to be on designs, in our food, in fragrances. One of the biggest crazes this time of year, every year, is the pumpkin spice latte. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Maybe you're indifferent to it and you just don't care. There's a lot of buzz around it on social media, but I've never really seen the appeal myself. I've tried it, didn't really think that much to it, and I kind of stick to my same coffee order. But what about you? Do you like the pumpkin spice latte or not? Let us know in the comments below. In this video, you might have seen, if you've clicked on the link then you know what it's about, we'll be making some wreaths. So I'm going to show you how to make these exact wreaths that I'm holding. I've done this as a sort of post-filming clip so that you could see the end result of what you could make if you follow along, or just for some inspiration so that you can pick up the process and then go off and make your own wreaths. So the wreath frame is one of the most important items, as this will be the foundation of your wreath and what you stick all of your decorations to. They come in a few different forms, and it's really important to pick carefully so that you pick the right one, as some of them are more suitable for different wreaths than others. So this is a very traditional wreath frame. This is a grapevine frame, and as you can see, it's just grapevine wrapped around lots of times and then held together with wire. So this is very sturdy, it will last a long time, and it's more suitable for maybe heavier wreaths, larger wreaths, and it's got that wonderful natural aesthetic if you're using natural items to make a more natural themed wreath. Or you can get these polystyrene ones, which are a little bit cheaper usually, and these ones are very lightweight because it's just made of polystyrene. So these are maybe suitable for smaller wreaths, or possibly if you're just using man-made or store-bought items or crafted items like paper craft, or these little sort of fabric leaves for example, that you can stick on this so it's still relatively lightweight, and this will hold its shape and hold the items that you've stuck on it too. You can also make your own, so if you've got any like a willow tree or salix tree or something with flexible branches, you could just make one of these by wrapping them around and holding them in place with wire, so you can make one for free. So you need something to affix the decorations to the wreath frame, and depending on the type of wreath you're making, it might help you decide what you'll use. So you could use a mixture of both depending on the mixture of decorations that you've got. So if you're going for a more traditional look or traditional method, you would use wire, so you can get this in lots of different forms. So we've got some silver florist wire. This is a thin gauge, so it's really easy to cut and it's quite malleable. We can get this coated in green as well as cut lengths, usually listed as florist wire. Then you've got this, which I like to use. This is called bind wire. So again, it's usually found in the floristry section or craft section, and it's just very thin wire coated or covered in a craft paper or brown paper. So it really goes with that natural aesthetic, and once it's on, you can't really see it, but it's really easy to cut and use. Alternatively, you could use some form of glue. If you are using an adhesive, just make sure that it is fast drying and it is quite a sturdy glue or adhesive as well. So a hot glue gun is perfect because it dries really quickly and it's long lasting. So if you want a long lasting wreath, then this will be perfect. Just be careful because it does get very hot. Then you need something to cut the items with. Make sure you've got the right tools to do a proper job. So if you're just using crafted items, you might get away with just scissors. These will be fine. These will also cut through thin gauge wire as well if you are using wire. If you are maybe using a thicker wire, or maybe you just want to save your scissors and not damage them potentially with the wire cutting, you can use these. These are just small jewellery pliers, or if you've got larger pliers, but as long as they've got the actual wire cutting bit on them, then you could use those too. And if you're using anything quite heavy, such as the twiggy items or natural items that you might need to cut down, then you could use some secateurs instead, which will do a better job of cutting those than scissors. So make sure you've got the right tools as well. And again, if you're crafting, you might use something like a craft knife. Again, just be safe with whatever you're using. So then you need the main items to actually build your wreath up. So I see this in two layers, the base layer and the decorative layer. So the base layer is what will make up the majority of your wreath, and then the decorations are of course what you put on afterwards or towards the end to give it a bit more colour and a bit more detail. So for the base layer, if you're going for a natural looking wreath, generally it's good practice to use something that's evergreen. So at least that way you know it's not going to die or fall apart when it's on the wreath, and it's going to last a long time hopefully. So I generally use rosemary. Is a fantastic item to use if you can get your hands on it. This is evergreen and it's got a wonderful smell to it too, but it just has that nice sort of full, very compact and wreath look to it, if that makes sense. If you are making one nearer the festive season, you could possibly use things such as fir trees or Christmas trees, branches, and then that'll give you the same sort of look and it'll be very long lasting. I've got some eucalyptus behind me as well. This is also from the garden, but again you might be able to find this out in the wild, or if you go for like a walk in the woods or something, you might find some of this. You could use other things like ivy or holly, lots of different things, But again, try and find things that are evergreen that will stand the test of time once you've made your wreath. So then when it comes to decorating your wreath, there are so many different options available depending on the look that you're going for. So I found these roses earlier today and I thought they would be perfect for the wreath making because of the colour. So this wonderful yellow through to orange and red. So these have got that wonderful autumnal vibe to them. And I did say get evergreen items that would stand the test of time. You might find with some flowers, maybe they're already dried and they are a good natural decoration, but some flowers actually dry really well, so roses do dry very well, so I'm quite happy with putting these on the wreath. So roses that I found earlier today, and you could use things like pine cones or acorns or horse chestnuts, coconuts, those sorts of things that you might be able to find again in the garden, or if you go for a walk in a woodland or something like that, if you've got something nearby. You can also buy artificial ones if need be, and I'll touch on those in just a second. Other items that maybe you won't use for the majority of the wreath, but you can use to add a bit of colour. I came across these as well as I was out today. Again, these were, I think these were 3 for £5. So what I'll do, I'll take a few sprigs of this and then I'll plant the actual plants in the garden. But these are heathers and you can see the wonderful autumnal colours on these. So I'll take a few sprigs of these just to add a bit of colour to the natural wreath that I'll show you how to make in just a second. But see what else you can find in your local area. If you can't find many natural decorative items, or you just want to use artificial ones to stand the test of time, you can get some really great ones and really affordable ones from craft stores. So I've got some acorns here. Again, you could probably do the same with pine cones and berries. So these are just polystyrene painted berries on wires, so perfect for making wreaths with. And I've also got some little plastic pumpkins here and apples to go with our autumnal theme. If you don't want to buy all of the different bits separately, again, you might think all of that will add up. While all of these things are very affordable, again, depending on where you get them from, shop around, you can actually buy kits that have all of the different items in to give you a range of different decorative items without having to buy all of the different things separately. So this, for example, has got cinnamon sticks, orange slices, the berries, the pine cones, the acorns. This was only about £3 for all of this. So this could give you a really nice range of decorative items if you buy it in a kit instead for a much lower price if you may be making only 1 or 2 wreaths. So before we go on to make the wreath, just a quick note, if you are finding natural items, if they're from your garden then that's fine, you've got permission to get them. If you are going into a public area or a woodland area, just make sure that you do have permission to take any items. If you are taking natural items, only take what you need, and there's some best practice with taking cuttings from items. So always take from the lowest part of the plant or side shoots, never take from the top or the main growing point, as that could disrupt the growth of the plant and potentially even kill it depending on what plant it is. And if you are taking things like berries, horse chestnuts, pine cones, those sorts of things, just take what you need for the wreath that you're making. Remember, other things rely on those items too, such as the creatures that live in that area. So remember to respect nature from what you're taking the items from and only take what you need. So now let's get to making the wreath, and in a second I'll change the angle of the camera so you can see exactly what I'm doing and follow along if you've got the materials with you, or just for inspiration so you can use the same method with making your own wreath. Or maybe if you get the items and you want to do something similar, you could always rewatch the video and follow along the video as you make yours. So I like to prepare the different items that I'm using. So I'm making a natural wreath and I want to make sure that all of the items I'm using are of a similar length. So if there's anything that's maybe a bit wonky or too long, too short, particularly too long, then I'll cut them down all to the same length. So all of these bits of rosemary, for example, I've cut down so they're the same sort of length. Same with the eucalyptus as well. All of these I've cut down to the same sort of length, and each one's got a branching bit off it too. So they all look quite similar, and that makes it a lot easier when we actually come to making the wreath to just then bunch them up and stick them on, rather than messing around trying to get them the right shape as we go and interrupting our flow. So preparation will help make the process much easier. So all we're going to do with this step is prepare the bunches. So rather than attaching all of these individual sprigs of rosemary to the wreath frame, what we're going to do is create bunches of the natural elements together, and then we can just attach the bunches around the frame. So I'm thinking if we make 8 bunches to begin with those 2 different lots of eucalyptus, that should give us a good coverage of the frame. So all I'm doing is taking the pieces of rosemary, bunching them together, adding the piece of eucalyptus as well, and then just trying to make sure that it looks okay. So then when you've got a bunch that you're happy with, just take a piece of the wire and fasten it around the bottom of the sprig, just to hold all of the pieces together. There will be some more wire involved later on when we attach it to the wreath frame, and then that should keep it secure on the wreath frame. But for now, we've got the one bunch there, so we should have 8 in total once we're done. So I think for the last one I used about 3 pieces of the rosemary and 1 of the pieces of the eucalyptus. And then once that's in place, if you notice any bits are sticking out or maybe a little bit out of shape, then just trim them down as needed. Now I'll do exactly the same, just take a piece of wire and now I'm going to fasten that together as tightly as I can. So here we have the first 4 bunches. These are the bits with the main eucalyptus pieces, and then I'll do 4 more with the smaller eucalyptus pieces. So there's the 4 bunches with the smaller pieces of eucalyptus, so we've got 8 pieces in total. Now that might be enough to cover the wreath frame, so let's just tidy up some of this mess that's come off this and then we will attach it to the frame. So before we stick anything to the wreath frame, it's a good idea to actually position it around it just to see how it will sit on the wreath frame. Is it giving us the look and feel that we're after? Do we have enough bunches? Are the bunches large enough to cover the frame, for example? So I've got the 4 with the larger pieces of eucalyptus and the 4 bunches with the smaller pieces here. So I'm just going to position them around the frame. I want quite a symmetrical looking wreath, so I'm going to pop them at equal distances around the frame just to see how they will look initially. Now what I want to do as well is just make sure that the base of the bunch is against the frame, as that's where it's going to be fastened with the wire, and then the top of the bunch is starting to fan out, so that'll give extra sort of volume to the wreath. But if you think once they're all the way around, that'll give us a nice sort of fan of all of that foliage, and then we can start to add the decorations towards the end. Again, when you're starting to lay them out, what you want to do is make sure that when you've got all of them in place, the top of one bunch covers the bottom of the other bunch, again, so that once you've got all of the wire in place as well and they're all fastened in, all of those bits are hidden, so it looks like you've just got all of that foliage. So there you can see, with all of the bunches just held in place, just balanced in place at the moment, that gives us a really good coverage of the wreath. Of course it does need tidying up, but we can give that a bit of a rejig once we start to fasten it down. But I'm quite happy that all of those bunches give us a good coverage and fill out that frame. Now when it comes to attaching the bunches to the frame, it's really easy. We're just going to use wire again just to go around the base of the bunches and then secure it in place. I have seen there are methods where you can actually use just one piece of wire and then wrap it up and then attach the other bunches all with the same piece of wire going round. However, I think that's quite fiddly and I don't want to get tangled up in the wire, so I prefer to use single pieces of wire for each bunch, and then I've got more flexibility as well if I need to move them or adjust them too. So just as before when we were positioning them to see where they'd go, make sure the base of the bunch is against the point on the wreath frame that you want it to be. So this is at the 6 o'clock point if it were a clock face, and then the foliage is fanning out, and then again we'll get that nice look that we had from the positioning of the bunches once we actually start to attach the rest of the bunches shortly. So all I'm going to do is attach the bunch with the wire, just wrapping it around the frame. Again, depending on the frame that you've got, if you've got a frame with wire or openings in it, then you can go through the frame as well, not necessarily around the frame. And I've twisted that wire on there just to make sure it's secure, and now I'm just going to wrap it tightly just like I did when I fastened the bunches together. So I'm just going to add a second piece just here. So there's the first bunch in place, that's secured there, and now we're just going to do the same with the rest of them. I find it's easier to go around in reverse order and cover each base as we go, and then we tuck the last one in underneath this foliage rather than going round this way. I'm not sure why, you can do it either way, that is your preference, but I find it easier to do this way. So now I'm going to just go with the other bunches, alternating between the main bit of eucalyptus and the smaller bit, as we did when we sort of positioned them out, and then just fasten them in place in exactly the same way. So 2 bits of wire just to hold them tight with the foliage sticking out and the base of the bunch stuck against the wreath frame. So here's the wreath so far, and we're on the last bunch. As I said earlier, all we're going to do is tuck the bottom of the bunch underneath the foliage of the first bunch that we put on, and just make sure that is against the frame and tucked in so the wire bits are covered as much as possible, and then the foliage on top of that bit is covering the one previous to it. And then we're just going to add the wire just to secure that in place. Don't worry about how it looks at the moment. We can rejig it and sort of try and reposition things if we need to, if there are any bits that are still on show of the frame. We can also use additional pieces, if need be, that we've got left over just to fill in some of the gaps. And here we have the completed first layer. So all of the 8 bunches are now on the wreath, and the wreath is actually too big to fit in the camera shot now. So if I just flip it over, and you can see the base of the wreath there, so you can see all of the foliage and how much bigger that has made it. So you see that I've started to get the decorative bits ready around the outside, but before I start to put those on the wreath, I just want to fill any gaps that I can see where I can still see the wire on show. So if you do spot any gaps, just use any offcuts that you've got, depending on the materials that you're using, to fill those in. So you might need to use some adhesive to stick them in place, you might need to use a little bit of extra wire to stick them in place, and then just make sure that you rejig the foliage to cover that wire. I'm just going to slot these in between the gaps in the wire or the gaps in the grapevine, and that should still secure it in place. So I'm going to do that with the same pieces where I can see the wire, and then once we've done that, it'll hopefully fill this middle bit out a little bit more as well and make the wreath look a bit fuller too. So hopefully all of this will give us those wonderful autumnal colours and give us a really full looking wreath. So we've got the pumpkins just here, and these are quite handy because they've got the wire attached as well, so they'll be easy to slot in and affix. Then we've got these little bunches of apples too. Again, they've got the wires attached, so should be easy to fix in. Some little sets of berries, so these were all separate. I've just mixed the orange and the yellow together to match the colour scheme, and there's 6 on there, but 4 lots of those bunches. And then I've got 4 headless roses, very apt for Halloween coming up, so I've cut 4 of the flowers off, and then they will go into the wreath. And then I've taken some of the colour from the heather as well, so we've got the yellow, the orange and the red, so I'll put these sprigs in amongst the bunches that are already on there, and then these will stand out a little bit more as these separate decorations. So let me bring the wreath back, and then we can start slotting them in. As I said with these ones have got the wires on already, so these are quite easy just to slot in, then twist the wire, and that should fix them in place. These ones, what I've got is a little bit of some Mod Podge, which is very similar to PVA, if not the same, but I do think it is a little bit stronger because once it does dry, it does stick very strongly. So rather than mess around with the hot glue gun just for these smaller bits, I'm going to use this. It does take a little bit longer to dry, but once we slot these into the bunches, or even if these go through into the grapevine, as we did with the little bits of rosemary that we did to fill out the gaps, they should be fairly secure anyway, and then this is just an extra bit of adhesive just to stick them permanently in place. So just like I did with the bunches, I'm going to put these at intervals. There's 4 of everything, so I'm going to distribute them around so that they're symmetrical to each other depending on which decoration that I'm doing, and then I'll move them around accordingly so there's a good spread of decorations. And now I've got the 4 roses, so I'll put these in position so they are symmetrical across the wreath. So they were the only bits that needed sticking down, so I'll get rid of the glue, and then all of these other bits that we've got all have the wires attached, so we can just slot these in and then twist the wire around just to hold them in place, and we can cut off any excess wire that we don't need. So I'm just going to start slotting these in, again where there might be gaps where we need some decoration, and then keeping them all symmetrical as we go. So that's the decoration done on this wreath now. I will show you this with the camera further back so you can see the full wreath and how all of these decorations really bring that colour to the green foliage. And now we'll move on to the second wreath. Just a quick note on tidying up the wreath, so you may do this after the first layer or after you finish doing the wreath entirely, or maybe both. You can go around with some scissors and just tidy up, cut off any bits that are maybe sticking out too far, maybe bits that shouldn't be there or bits in the centre, wherever it might look untidy. So I'm quite happy with this. I'm going to leave it as it is. There are some bits that are sticking out quite far, but there's various bits fanning out around the outside, around the whole wreath. So I'm quite happy with how this looks. But if you're looking for something a bit more compact or a bit neater, then you can trim it down as needed as well. So we used a very traditional method with the first wreath where we used the bunches and then attached everything with wire. But for this one, I'm going to be using a glue gun because I'm going to be sticking things to this wreath frame, as these elements that I'm using this time, these store-bought items, these little fabric leaves, they don't actually have any wires attached to them. So rather than me attaching lots of wires and then trying to attach them with the wire, sort of binding it round, I'm just going to stick them on and create the base layer. But then I do also have these which do already have the wires on. So these were from the dried flowers or artificial flowers that I showed you earlier, the bunches that I bought on sale, and I've just separated them out to get these sprigs of whatever this is meant to be, these dried flowers. So they will go on there to add some depth and texture once we've done the base layer, and then I might add some extra decorations just to add a little bit more of the colour like we did with the first one. So with this grapevine wreath, you'll see that I've wrapped some bind wire around it. This one was quite a bit looser than the first one that I used, and it was quite uneven as well. So I've wrapped some bind wire around it quite tightly all the way around, just to tighten it up, as well as to get a more uniform surface to stick these on and make it a little bit neater. The wire will also help us when we do come to adding these in to hopefully secure these in place too. So what we're going to do with this one is just take the fabric leaves that we've got. This would be the same with any other decorations that you've got, or craft items that don't have wires on, for example, or maybe if you're just using an adhesive to stick it on. Take the adhesive, add a bit of adhesive onto the wreath frame, and then stick them on. And what I'm going to try and do is add the leaves in different colours, sort of alternate the colours just to get a nice pattern going around and really make it nice and colourful, and then just try and cover as much of the wreath frame as possible. Like I said, with the bunches with the first wreath, it's much easier to actually work in reverse, so you're overlapping the leaves as you go along and then just tuck in the ends when you get to the last one, and that just makes it a little bit easier than trying to tuck every single one in as you go if you go the other way around. So let's get started. So all I'm going to do, as I said, is start to apply some of this adhesive. This is very hot and it does dry very quickly, so I'll need to be quite quick. Rather than me showing you sticking on all of the leaves, I've just carried on as I started, alternating the leaves and then overlapping them as I've gone round, as you can see here. So I've used a few more greens than I did the yellows and reds because I had more greens. And I did start off originally with 3 leaves across, but I've actually reduced that down to 2. As I've noticed, it's really the outside edge that needs to be covered. That's what's going to be seen when it's on display. The inside edge, most of it is covered, but there are some bits where it maybe isn't, but that's where these decorations are going to come in and go in the centre, so that's going to be covered. Anyway, that will also tidy up some of this unevenness in the centre, although some of the unevenness is just down to the natural shape and the contours of the wreath frame, which was a bit uneven to begin with, even with the extra bind wire. So let's get the next layer on, which is going to be putting these in the middle, and what I'm going to try and do is slot them into the frame so that we have a nice sort of fan, just like we did with the first one, but coming from the centre of the wreath. So in order to do this layer, these already have the wire attached to it. I might need to cut that down because it is quite long if that does get stuck on anything, but hopefully that will go all the way through the wreath frame, and then we can twist the end of the wire to secure it in place, so we won't actually need any adhesive for this. So I'm just going to start by slotting that in there in such a way that once it's down, it will also hold the edges of the leaf down. And there is the wire that's just come through. So now all I can do is just twist that round, and then that will secure that in place and tuck it under a little bit of the wire that's there, and then that will hopefully hold that in place. But I'll leave that for now, just in case I do need to move it around, and then I will carry on with the others, and then we'll fasten them all in place in just a second. So I've put all of the sprigs now in the centre and they're fanning out nicely, but I've got all of these bits of wire sticking out of the base from the wreath frame. So now I'm just going to bend these bits of wire over just to hold those sprigs in place, and I'll just tuck those end pieces of wire into the wreath frame, under the bind wire and into the wreath frame, so there's no sharp edges, but then that should keep them secure. So this is the second wreath complete. I've finished securing these sprigs in place just by bending those wires back, and then I just added some little decorative elements from the ones that I had, the acorns and some mixed berries, just to add a little bit of colour in the centre to match all of the wonderful autumnal colours around the outside. So here are the two wreaths that we've made. They follow the same natural theme but quite different aesthetics. We've got the big bright one with all of the colourful decorations, the flowers and the greenery, and then the more sort of natural one that would maybe fit a sort of boho or cottagey type theme with the dried greenery and the darker reds and yellows on the leaves there. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the sort of bright and airy or the cottagey boho type feel? Or maybe you would go for something completely different. Let us know in the comments below what you would do if you were making your own wreath. Or maybe if you have already made your own, let us know what you went for. Did you go for store-bought items, found items, or crafted items, or maybe a mixture of all of the above? If you do have a go at making this yourself, by all means come back and visit the video. If you do go out and buy different craft items and want to follow along, let us know how you get on by finding us on Instagram, Grow Your Wellbeing. You can tag us in your photos and then we'll be able to see what you've been up to and what you've been making and what you've been putting on your wreaths. Now this is quite different from my usual videos which are focused on houseplants. However, I do try and include some DIY plant projects and plant crafts where I can, and I'll try and include some more throughout the year. So if you have found this interesting and useful, then consider subscribing. I'll have new videos every week, usually on a Sunday, sometimes a Monday, and they will usually be on houseplants or sometimes the plant related crafts. This is a bit of a tenuous thing with the greenery and the flowers and bringing nature indoors. If you have found this interesting, then I do have another video which I'll link at the end, which is about festive wreaths. So it follows the same sort of process with wreath making, but this time a different aesthetic because we've made them for the festive season. So I'll link that at the end if you want to watch that next. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll respond to everyone. And as always, thank you for watching Grow Your Wellbeing.